So the last few weeks, our theme for Lent is this season of the church calendar. So there's different kinds of calendars. Well, there's a church calendar, and we always think of Christmas and Easter. Advent gets us ready for Christmas. Lent gets us ready for Easter. And so this is the third part of our series on Lent. We talked about remembrance, repentance, and now resistance. And so this last song that we sang talks about really a way of developing resistance. And it's connected to the Bible story that I'm going to share with you today. Somebody going away to a quiet place, a secret place, to receive from God, to be able to have some answers and strength when the crisis of life come. So, remembrance, we said, is to live remembering. Remembrance isn't just to remember the past, it's to bring it into the present so that we can impact the future. Bringing our past into the present, sometimes to heal it, or to repeat it, or to turn it into something that helps us move forward. So that was the first part. Repentance. Repentance is to make a change of 180 degrees. That means to turn all the way and go in the opposite direction. To change our attitude and our actions. To repent is to choose to begin to fully rely on God. Fully rely on God. And then today, the topic is resistance. And so we're going to explore the idea of resistance with the help of a Bible story from Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 to 20. So it's a short story, but it's very full of life and full of details. We're going to read it, and then we're going to look at some of the details. But before I read it, I want to clarify something interesting. Most of you know that there are 4 different Gospels in the New Testament. 4 different writers wrote a gospel being the story of Jesus and his life and work and death and resurrection. So the story that we're going to read from Matthew 17, this story appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels. Each writer, each one of the Gospel writers, is telling from his own memory, his own experience, and with a purpose to teach and to clarify the different things that are happening. So before we observe it and we analyze it a little bit, we're going to read Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 to 20. The words are up here on the screen. The top part is English, and then the bottom part is Spanish. Now, just so you know what happens behind the scenes here, there's Christ Church. This is not in your notes, Andres or Ethan. Christ Church is a truly amazing community. And I get the privilege to see so many different volunteers and individuals and people coming through and going out all around the world. And so one thing we really try to do is help give all of you an opportunity to develop your talents, your skills, your participation. If you need to just be here and sit quietly and not do anything, that's great. Some people are too busy all week and all their life, and they need a break. If you want to learn to do something, that's great too. And we try to give everybody a voice. You should know that right now on Sunday morning, we have a children's program that's in English and one that's in Spanish. Now, we wish we had Portuguese and French, and there's all these different language groups going around, but we literally have Spanish and English going on in this little tiny place. And Spanish and English here, Spanish and English online. And so Yesterday was a great event. They had story time for the parents, art, amazing activity for children, a workshop in another language for parents on third culture kids. So, and when I'm speaking, I literally have to practice. I'm learning to speak less time. Some people have left the church because I don't preach long enough. I said, well, I'd rather preach about 20 minutes and have something you can remember and work on and learn than preach 40 minutes and you go home and you say, man, I can't remember anything. There's so much information. And I like to talk fast when I'm inspired. But I know it's really important with the different languages and the interpretation to be understood. So I have learned to write out what I'm going to say. For the first 20 years of preaching, I never did that. Now I do. And since I'm working with 2 interpreters, I write it out in Spanish. And sometimes I'm too tired to write it in Spanish and make a copy in English. So I'm preaching from Spanish. It helps me to slow down, and it helps me to be accurate so that everybody's hearing the same thing. So, when you think I'm talking slowly because I'm not excited enough about it, believe me, I am excited. I could talk for an hour, but I want everybody to really understand at least one key idea from the morning, and today it's resistance. So here's the story. And I'll read it a little faster since everybody can see the words. Oh, so I need to find it in my English Bible. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. O unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we drive it out? Verse 20. Jesus replied, because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So, that's an amazing story. It raises a lot of questions, like, what happened? And so maybe it's usually if you read a story like that, you want to go back and read it 2 or 3 times. But I already did that for you. So when the multitude arrives, it says that when they arrived to the multitude, and so I'm asking myself, who are they? When they arrived, who is they? And so I look back in the text, and we find out it's Jesus, and it's Peter, James, and John. So Jesus has been away with Peter, James, and John, 3 of his disciples. So they are arriving to a place where 9 of Jesus' disciples are there with a great crowd of people. And when they arrive there, this crowd of people has come because they wanted to hear Jesus. They wanted to ask for things. They wanted to see and receive some of the miracles of healing that they had heard about and perhaps experienced. And there's a problem. And so just thinking about I want you just to use your imagination. Think about the problem that's being presented. There's a man. He is desperate. He says that his son is demon-possessed with epileptic seizures that are severe and constant. And he's asked for help from the disciples because they have become famous for healing people together with Jesus. But he asked them for help, and they couldn't help him. So that's a big problem. You got a desperate father with a very sick son, in a critical situation, and he's asking for help, and the people that he thinks can help him cannot. Have you ever been in a desperate situation? You're at the embassy and you need paperwork like now, right now, and nobody's like, oh, I can't help you, can't do that. That would be an easy one. Or in a hospital with somebody who's sick and, they need help and nobody seems to know what to do. Or a relationship problem. Well, the answer that Jesus gives is he rebukes the demon in such a way that he leaves the boy, and Matthew says the boy is healed from that moment. That's the end of it. It's fixed. Well, let's think about who had a problem. Okay, that is sort of like the big picture problem. Let's think about the individuals. Okay, first of all, the boy has a problem, doesn't he? The boy's problem is different from his father's problem. The boy is a victim. He's got this something happening into his life. Thank you, Gail, for the water. He's got something happening and he's the victim. He cannot control what's going on in his body, in his life, and he's looking to his father for help. The father has a problem because he doesn't understand what's happening to his son. And he's desperate to get help. But since I've studied something of that culture, and I don't think our cultures are that different, the people are probably looking at the dad, and he knows it, and thinking, it's your fault. Something you did or must have done has caused this problem. Your son wouldn't be like he is if you'd done the things you were probably supposed to do. And so there's this guilt. What if it's my fault? And so the people are judging him. They're blaming him for the situation of his child. And it's the cultural blame and it's the religious people. And we see that in one of the other Gospels. So if the innocent son is suffering, it's because the father must have done something, and it's hidden or bad, something in his life that has brought this curse on his family. So that's part of what's going on in the dad's life and his problem. Now, the 9 disciples also have a problem. These 9 disciples. Now, Mark tells us in his gospel, it's interesting, Mark is the shortest gospel. He usually just gives the briefest details, but when he tells this story, he writes twice as much as Luke or Matthew. That's very interesting because if you studied it, then you know that Mark probably wrote first, and Luke saw what Mark had written, and Matthew saw what Mark had written, so they used his text and then usually added details. In this case, they shortened it. But when Mark writes, he says that the disciples, instead of talking to the Father, were arguing with the teachers of the law. The religious teachers are there, and they're arguing about it. So can you imagine that problem? I would say it's a distraction. They're surrounded by a great multitude of people. The problem is this boy and the father. But they are preferring, because they don't know what to do, I get it, they don't know what to do, and it's whatever they're doing is not working, so they get in an argument with these teachers of the law about, politics and theology and what's the right thing to do and whether or not the boy has a demon or if he just is epileptic and if they believe in demons, and who knows what they're talking about. Meanwhile, this chaotic scene is full of adrenaline and a lot of anxiety. And then there's Jesus. Jesus has a problem because Jesus comes out from this amazing time with Peter, James, and John, and he comes back and there's this chaos going on. There's the multitude, and 9 of his disciples can't figure out how to handle this situation. And so when the Father sees he's on the crowd and he's looking around, where's Jesus? Where is Jesus? Where is this guy? And have you ever wondered that in the midst of your problem? Where is this guy? Why doesn't he hear me? Why doesn't he help me? Can't he see how desperate I am? And so Jesus comes up, and the guy sees him. That must be him. Goes running for Jesus. And he says, look, I came to your disciples, and they couldn't help me. Now Jesus says, oh, unbelieving and perverse generation. All three Gospels remember that part. They're like, wow, what did he mean? Is he talking about his disciples? Is he just sort of talking about the world in general? What is he talking about? Sounds pretty harsh. Jesus, full of love, saying, unbelieving and perverse generation. But what was his tone of voice? Was it very, oh, unbelieving and perverse generation? Or was it like, look at you guys. And so he says, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Now, I say that we have one more problem. Jesus' problem is that his disciples are ineffective. They're distracted. They're focused on the wrong thing. And our problem is that these different stories, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, tell a lot of different details. And what is the most important? So I know that Mark probably wrote based on the testimony of Peter. And so it's interesting, he's telling a lot, but Peter wasn't there in the moment. So one of the other guys has told Mark, this is what happened. And Mark writes twice as much. And so what is interesting to me is the way that each one of the writers concludes the story. Because so far, we have pretty much the same information. If you read Mark, you'll get a lot more details about the boy, how when he threw himself down and he's foaming at the mouth, and how the dad knelt. And you just get more color for your imagination. But how does each one conclude the story? Now, Luke, who's a doctor, is writing, and sorry guys, I'm getting away from my mic. I hope in Zoom you're hearing me well. Luke says that the people were amazed. After Jesus healed the boy, the multitude is amazed. And okay, sorry, I lost my place. Luke says the people are amazed, but Jesus changes the topic and starts talking to his disciples about the fact that he's going to be betrayed and be given up as a prisoner. He's going to be arrested. And so the people did not understand, Luke says. The disciples didn't understand, and they didn't ask Jesus any questions about it. So I say, that's interesting. So the medical doctor just says, the people see this situation, and I think it's a typical reaction for many people. Just amazed, wow, that must have been a God thing. That must have been like an amazing situation. And then just go on our life without understanding or asking any questions about it. Now, Mark ends this episode with a conversation between Jesus and the disciples. And Mark says that the disciples came over to Jesus and got him away from the crowd, and they said, how come we couldn't do something about it? See, because they've already been out in the villages and towns actually healing people. Jesus said, go out and use my name and believe in me, and you're going to do these things. And they did. And now they say, how come we couldn't fix this? And Jesus tells them in Mark chapter 9, verse 29, this kind of demon only comes out through prayer. And some of the ancient manuscripts add the word and fasting. So this kind of demon only comes out through prayer. And then Jesus tells them that he's going to be arrested. And Mark says, and they didn't understand what he was talking about. So it's very interesting. That's very different from Luke saying, people were amazed and they went on about their business. Mark says they asked Jesus, why couldn't we do something? And he says, well, if you want to be able to solve this kind of situation, you need to learn to pray. Now that's interesting because they had already asked Jesus earlier, Lord, teach us to pray. And he said, well, when you pray, pray like this. And now they're in a situation saying, hey, we couldn't solve this crisis. So, well, you got to learn to pray. That's interesting. So we'll come back to that. Now, Matthew describes the same question that appears in Mark, the disciples coming and saying, hey, how come we couldn't cast out this demon? But his answer is a little different, and we already saw it. We read it on the screen. And basically, Matthew says that Jesus told him, look, this is because you don't have faith. Mark says, well, you need to pray. Matthew says, well, you don't have faith. If you had faith as small as a mustard seed, and I hold up my fingers, but really a mustard seed, if I had it, you couldn't see it. It's a little tiny seed. If you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Now, that's a metaphor. You probably can't move the mountain, but he's a metaphor for in a crisis situation, you would be able to respond well. You would be able to resolve these problems. And so, because if you're connected to God, for God, nothing is impossible. So, that's an amazing passage. So I ask myself, in all of this, what is important for me today? Does any of this have anything to do with my life today? Now, I have heard from many, many different Christians the idea, if you just had faith, you could solve this. In other words, if you have a problem and it's bigger than you are, and I've had problems, and I do have problems that are bigger than me, then that's only because you don't have enough faith. So that makes the question, well, what is faith? Most people I talk to feel like they have at least a little bit of faith. So like, what is Jesus talking about? If I say I don't even have the faith of a mustard seed, that's like I don't have any faith at all. Well, I have some faith, but I'm not getting these results. That's the problem of the 9 disciples, right? So, hey, we've done a lot in our life. We followed Jesus. We listened to Jesus. We have faith. And Jesus says, well, not enough for this situation. So I'm asking myself, what does that tell me about me? I have problems. Everybody in the story had a problem. Everybody in the story had anxiety. All of us will always have anxiety. Anxiety doesn't go away. We learn to manage it, because anxiety is like a normal part of life. But let me ask you this. Think of that story. Who do you identify with the most in that story? You don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell anybody. I'll just, in your imagination, who are you most like? The child who's a victim of something that's out of control? Or the father who is overwhelmed because he wants to help, but he doesn't know how, and he feels like maybe it's his fault? This problem that somebody else is having, his son, might be his fault. Or you like the disciples, distracted, denying the obvious problems in front of them because they really don't know what to do. That's my favorite, actually. It's not my favorite, but it's what I do. It's a big problem, so I'll just pretend the problem's not there. It's right here in front of me. But if I just look over here, it's like that problem doesn't even exist because I can't see it. So me personally, I identify with the disciples that are like, I don't know what to do, so I'll just kind of do something else. Or maybe you're like Jesus. Jesus is just saying, wow, I know what to do, but I'm just so sad because nobody else seems to know what to do. Everybody around me lacks the faith and the connection to God the Father to be able to live well. So it's important for me to see that all of these things are interconnected. Everybody's in their own world, The child is thrown down there. I mean, he's just down on the floor. The father's looking for Jesus. The 9 are in the midst of the multitude arguing with the teachers of the law about the processes, the permissions, the methods, the politics, the doctrines. And Jesus has been connected with his Father, and he's very aware that he's there to love the people and to teach them. You know, we all need each other. The child needed his dad. The dad needed the disciples. The disciples needed Jesus. Jesus needed the Father. Is there anybody in this story that we could leave out and still have all that we need? Is there anybody we could leave out? Well, we need the boy because he's the sick one. We need the dad because he brought the boy. The boy couldn't come by himself. We need Jesus because he's the one that heals the boy. So maybe we could do without the disciples. But if the disciples weren't there, the crowd would have never come. And Jesus wouldn't have come back to that place because he'd have gone to wherever the disciples were. You see, in some kind of strange way, everybody in the story is connected. The disciples, the ones that lack the faith and couldn't do it and got distracted, but they're still the bridge between the multitude and Jesus. So even in Jesus' world, even the people that are missing the point and lack the faith are the bridge to connect each other to God. I think that's a deep thought. The disciples leave with Jesus. The people leave amazed. The disciples go with Jesus asking, what could we have done? They're confused by the mysteries. They want to have answers. But they're challenged to want to prepare themselves better. Jesus said, you've got to have faith. You've got to learn to pray. Now, what does this have to do with Lent? What does this have to do with us? Lent, I explained last week, every year means we get 6.5 weeks to consider how to prepare ourselves better. Remembrance, repentance, and learning to resist. So resist sounds like maybe fighting, but I don't mean it like that. Many of you probably do some exercise, and so you want to build some strength using resistance, right? Makes you stronger. You want to resist temptation of you don't want to eat one more dessert, so you'd have to build a little resistance in your mind. Or you want to work harder, you want to grow, and so you have to build some discipline. And this is the resistance I'm talking about. Building some spiritual resistance, some spiritual strength. And so we're not just thinking somebody else is going to solve this. The 9 disciples did not know how to resist the debate and the heated discussion. You ever had that trouble? Family dinner, somebody says some stupid thing, and you're just like, I can't believe you just said that. And you just get pulled into the debate about the politics or about the religion or about the money or about anything, sports. And the disciples couldn't resist that temptation. And so they turn away from the dad, that they could have at least comforted him. They turn away from the dad and the boy and they argue. The disciples couldn't resist the temptation to see this multitude instead of the individual with his problem. And so they're looking about, what is everybody thinking? What does everybody else know? What is everybody else worried about? And they want to be part of that. The disciples did not know how to explain that the gifts and the ability to heal didn't come from them. It came from God. And it was a mystery. And this one is healed and that one is not. But that is like God's problem. It's his mystery. and to have the freedom to say, you know what, I don't really know. Instead, they got in an argument. The disciples didn't know how to understand what Jesus was telling them. And Jesus invites them to change, to pray, to have faith. If you want to cast out this kind of demon, he said, you've got to have faith. You got to learn to pray. And so that is resistance. Praying is not just repeating something or asking for something or claiming or arguing with God, expressing something. That's all part of it. But prayer includes listening, learning, receiving, connecting to God, asking, telling, arguing, complaining. That could all be part of prayer. But prayer means listening, learning, receiving, connecting with God. It's not easy. And so the faith, the size of a mustard seed, cannot be understood as having positive thoughts. I'll just be positive. I'll just really, really want this. I'll just get everybody like having the same vibe. If everybody would just pray. Because then the people who have 100 people praying will have more success than the poor person who only has one person praying. Is that right? Well, that's not right. So that would be like a false way of thinking. Because then we would be determined about having the multitude behind us instead of realizing God sees the song that we sang, says he knows your name. You don't need 100 people praying for you. It makes me feel good, but I don't think that changes anything before God. But I don't know. I could be wrong. It's a mystery. How does God hear and answer prayer? Why does he answer prayer? Why does he seem to answer some and not others? Well, to resist is to have faith. And to have faith means to trust. To trust completely, to trust God with everything. The results, the control, it's releasing the results, release the outcome. The entitlement. You know, I'm a pretty good guy. I've been the pastor here for a long time. I deserve a little better from you, God. You know, you should know how hard I've worked for you. Now, I never say that out loud, but maybe you or I or people, we think that in our heart sometimes. Like, I deserve a little better. I mean, I actually got up and went to church this morning. So I thought I would have some help on Monday morning. I thought if I got baptized over at Christ Church, then I would get a good job. I thought if I asked the pastor to pray for me, then this would all be better. And so we think things and we think somehow we did the right thing, so now God needs to answer. He needs to respond. And that's not faith. It may not be completely wrong. It's natural. So be nice to yourself. Say, hey, I feel that way. Okay, you have your feeling. But faith is saying, you know what? Whatever outcome God gives me, I'm going to trust that, yeah, he knows the best. And I may not even understand it. If it's finance, if it's health, if it's family, if it's loneliness, if it's anxiety. And so when we discover our limit, we discover our problem, maybe we say, Lord, what can I learn about this? And the disciples, the 9 disciples, you know what they learned? Jesus gave them a gift. He said, you know, as much as you know and as great as you are, you can actually learn to pray more. You can actually get to a place where you can help this desperate father. Now, not all the problems that we have are spiritual, but spiritual resistance is what is going to help us learn to respond wisely in any crisis. And so every time that we consciously release our control and our outcomes and our expectations to God, then we're taking a step forward in our discipline to be more ready for the next crisis. That's what you and I need for the problems for tomorrow, to be willing to develop some resistance.